We now have a pre-recorded lecture from Dr. Terence Meaden, an archaeologist. He is a meteorologist, a physicist. He has made significant contributions to archaeology, especially in the Stonehenge and Avebury landscapes. And it's a real treat to have his new research here at Megalithomania 2024.
Hello, everyone in Megalithomania. It's good to be back here again. Thank you, Hugh, for inviting me. This talk, which includes a lot about Stonehenge, begins with the story of Pytheas the Greek, who sailed from Marseille in the Mediterranean about the year 325 BC, and he reached Northern Europe in order to learn where the source of tin and amber were that was being traded across Gaul and being purchased by merchants in the Mediterranean. Tin was very important in that time. When mixed with copper, you get bronze, and bronze was the important metal of that era. Now, during his voyage, he learnt where the source of the tin was. He reached by the obvious route going around Iberia and up the Atlantic coast of France. He reached Brittany, and by then he had spoken with people who were able to explain that the source of tin that was most important was in Cornwall, that is to say, across the sea in England. So that became his target. There we have Pytheas. That statue is in Marseille. So, beginning now in the south, Massalia, he went round the whole of Iberia, and it took 2 or 3 months from there to reach Brittany. A big question was, how did he get there? So Pytheas set out on a great voyage that would take him to Northern Europe, around Iberia, up the Atlantic coast of Gaul. By the time he got to Brittany, he'd learnt where the tin was coming from. He knew that he would have to cross the English Channel and arrive somehow in Cornwall. And later in the story, he reaches Stonehenge, somehow. How he got to Stonehenge has been a problem for previous people investigating this story of Pytheas. But what is so important about Stonehenge is that he really did get there. He really did visit Stonehenge, and he did talk with priests when he was there. It's because of what he learnt that it's obvious he had been speaking with the people who are running Stonehenge. Now, an important thing about Stonehenge is that he declared it to be a temple of Apollo, a temple of the sun god Apollo. And this was entirely satisfactory for him because he came from the Mediterranean where there are hundreds of temples to Apollo. And here he is looking at Stonehenge. He sees that the essence of it is the same. In particular, every temple has an inner sanctum. What is more, there are cult images in the inner sanctum. So what about Stonehenge? What do we know there? When I got this far in learning about the story of Pytheas, I realised we should really be looking more deeply at the stones which have survived in Stonehenge, hoping that I can find one or two which are cult images. I was very surprised to discover this one, which we're looking at now. This bluestone 67 is definitely a carving of a phallus. And it stood upright at one time in the middle of Stonehenge. Now it lies fallen. But it's a very fine carving and nobody can argue with it. Of course, the big question is, why has nobody else seen this before? We've all been looking for the last 5 centuries at Stonehenge. There have been, say, 1 million visitors in that period. Well, the problem is this carved cult image is no longer standing up. If it was, we would all know about it. It was knocked down by the fall of one of the stones of the Great Trilithon, and it's squeezed in between other stones. And the way that we approach this particular one is not usually in the direction in which I've taken this photograph. How did Pytheas make this journey? He came under a lot of criticism because the first critics were Greeks and Roman historians. They imagined that he must have gone in a trireme. That is to say, it's a huge boat with up to 50 men rowing it. There are also smaller triremes, and they can be as small as having 10 or 12 rowers. But whichever it is, there are big problems. If you go in a trireme, you have a lot of men to feed. It's very expensive. They need paying, they want food all the time and drink, and how many years will they be away? So some of the critics just said, we don't believe the story, or if it was partly done, the rest is exaggeration. That is what a trireme looks like, and it's so unlikely that he went that way. Professor Christina Roseman of Canada came up with a much better suggestion than that triremes were used. She suggested that what Pytheas was really doing was hitchhiking, using merchant ships to get him from port to port. After all, the merchant ships were manned by sailors who were used to travelling up the Atlantic coast as well. A major advance came when Professor Christina Roseman of Canada suggested that Pytheas may well have journeyed in a succession of merchant boats. After all, the merchant ships were manned by people who were used to travelling the coasts of the Atlantic. So it sounds a lot better that he started the journey in Marseille on a merchant ship that got him round the coast of Iberia all the way through to some place in Gaul, maybe Bordeaux or maybe farther north. After which he took his luck on finding a ship that would carry him on northward and onwards to England. Barry Cunliffe and several other people have agreed that this is very realistic. It answers so many problems that it is highly likely that this is what he did. Eventually, he is on the northern coast of Brittany, and he knows, because he's been told, that Cornwall is across the sea. Everybody who has studied this subject has assumed that he went to Cornwall. That's where he landed. But that is not at all the probable thing that he did. It's difficult hitchhiking, using merchant ships. You can wait a long time at a port before the next useful boat comes along, going exactly where you want to go. We know that he spent a lot of time in Brittany, and I suggest he was simply waiting for a ship that would get him to Cornwall. But there are also clues that suggest that he could well have sailed instead to Kent. And in sailing to Kent, a major problem is answered. The question of how he got to Stonehenge. You see, if he had gone directly to Cornwall, Stonehenge is so far away that, as critics have said, it seems unlikely that he would walk from Cornwall, Plymouth, or Penzance to Stonehenge and then back again. So what I'm suggesting is that he got on a boat which took him to England, but to Kent and not to Cornwall. So there we have it. If he's landing in Kent at a place which in his own book he named as Cantian, then if you're walking from Cantian to Cornwall, there is only one way to go. Let's look at a map of geology. You see now from Kent, if you try to go along the coastal road, you're going through dense forest, the Weald. But if you take a different line, you can follow the high chalk hills all the way like this through to Stonehenge. And that is the way that he must have gone, because if you look at any Iron Age map, and I'm thinking of the one supplied by the Ordnance Survey people, then you can see that there was a trackway very well used following the North Downs all the way to Stonehenge. So it would be natural then, if you're going from Kent to Cornwall, it's natural to go through Stonehenge even if you didn't know it was there. It's just on the way. In fact, it's so much on the way that the actual Iron Age track, which of course is a Bronze Age track being reused, joins the avenue for which Stonehenge is famous. So now, he arrives at Stonehenge. And from what we learn, Stonehenge was not damaged when he was there. He described it as a magnificent monument. I've been greatly interested in this because I'm a Wiltshireman, and many of my ancestors, surname Meaden, come from the village of Imber, and others from other villages around Stonehenge. And that's what I can say for the last 300 years. Another thing that I've learned about Stonehenge is that the architect who planned it, round about 2500 BC, besides making it into a temple, he also made use of a layout which would permit an understanding of a lunar calendar as well as a solar calendar. And I can talk about that later. It's important to know that every stone at Stonehenge was chosen for a reason, whether it was by shape or position. What is more, I can now explain every one of them. I might point out that professors like Mike Parker Pearson merely make some statement that Stonehenge was a place for the dead, and he has given no explanation for any one of the many stones at Stonehenge. By contrast, when you regard it as a temple and as a calendar, you can explain away every single stone. Let's begin with the heel stone. Everybody has often said it makes you think of a phallus when you look at it. Well, it certainly, in my opinion, did serve that purpose. If you're standing alongside the heel stone on the right day, midsummer solstice morning, then you see the sun rise in the direction opposite to which the current arrow, the white arrow, is pointing. We must allow for the fact that since the late Neolithic, the sun has been rising in a different place. It's now about 1 degree different in position. But when it was, when the Stonehenge was planned, the sun rose to the left of the heel stone as seen from the centre of Stonehenge and looking along the direction of the avenue. So what we must realise then, that in the thinking of the people of the time, a phallic stone casts a shadow which is again phallic. And in this case, it's going into the middle of the monument, which you can only do in the week of the summer solstice. On all of the dates, the sun cannot penetrate the monument. Now, if you're sitting in front of the heel stone, that is how the shadow looks as it enters the monument. But in fact, that is something which just cannot be done these days for many reasons. Instead, what is typical is that we are alongside the heel stone looking at the shadow which is gaining strength as the sun rises. Now, this is quite typical. The shadow is there already as soon as 2 minutes after sunrise, but it's very weak. But it didn't matter to the people, because if you can see it, that's all they mattered. I mean, what matters to me is trying to photograph it. That's a much more difficult thing. But it's so easy to see with the naked eye that the shadow, even before then, was entering the monument and going through to the altar stone. I've tried to strengthen the shadow here, but it remains difficult. And then as time goes on, the shadow comes out of the monument and moves away. And this is the reason why you cannot see the shadow on the day of the solstice. All those people there are in the way, and they're looking the wrong way. But what we need is a solstice morning with nobody there. And I hope that in coming years, a lot more people will be trying to photograph a clear sunrise without any people blocking the view. So in this reconstruction, I show how the heel stone shadow, which is here, reaches the altar stone, which is lying that way. I also wanted to notice at this stage there is a stone standing behind the altar stone. Clearly, in having a combination, male and female in this way, these people were believing in a fertility cult. It was important to them to have good fertility for their animals, their livestock, their crops, and of their women. All the time they were worried about fertility, and none of them were scientists. They just believed what they were told when it came to mythology. And this idea of shadows linking a phallic male image stone with a waiting female stone is found in dozens and dozens and dozens of other stone circles. In Ireland, I have looked at almost all of them. Certainly, I have seen all those which can be visited in the southwest of Ireland, Cork and Kerry, and there's also Knowth and Newgrange, where the principle works the same. What we're really having is what the Greeks called the hieros gamos, sacred marriage. It's the marriage of the gods, the marriage of sky with earth. So this painting was done in order to show what the inner sanctum of Stonehenge used to look like. And it's important to realise that Pytheas the Greek, when he was there, he would have seen it in that perfect state. The inner temple he actually calls magnificent, which certainly suggests that it wasn't damaged like it is now. But my predecessors in this subject were reading the Greek, or rather a Greek translation made by a particular person in 1935. And the way it was translated, it read as though there were two temples being described, two magnificent temples. Well, we know that is not possible if one of them is Stonehenge. A second temple is not close by. Yes, you might bring Avebury into it, but that is far away in terms of the walking distance in those days. Pytheas was in fact describing one temple, namely the outside and the inside. He was not talking about two temples. So, as I said earlier, every temple about which we know, every temple which is a fertility temple, has two cult images in it, or at least two, one female and one male. And above all, think of the Hindu temples. In the last 6,000 years, there could have been 1 million of them built, and they are all similar in having a Shiva lingam and a yoni. And I've been to India and I've seen them. And here in Britain, we have such a pair as well. Here is a typical phallic cult image from Greece. And at the time of Pytheas, there would have been a lot of them. Most of them were subsequently destroyed, many of them in the Christian period. Let's now look at our inner sanctum in Stonehenge. Very prominent is the stone, the blue stone 68. Luckily that's still standing, and it's very helpful because stone 67, which is the phallic one in question, is lying down here, not looking very much at all. I'm sure we've all seen it, but not realised what we're looking at. That is the glans end of the phallic bluestone 67. And when it was upright, it was taller than stone 68, and its position was roughly here. Let's move on. I have so many photographs which I've taken in the past 40 years, which include our now famous 67. None of them, in the way in which I took them, look like a carved phallus. This is the glans end. But when you move into the right position, you can get a very fine image indeed. So now, when I go to Stonehenge, I'm taking pictures of this quality. To look at that, nobody would think that that was part of the most important stone of it all in Stonehenge. We're looking there at this stone, which is the top end of an erect phallus. But when you stand in the right position, it's entirely different. You get a good full view. So we understand now that we really are looking at a carving of a phallus. In this position, in this plan, that's where it is, lying down, trapped between these other fallen stones and stone 68, standing up next to it. Now here's another observation which is of interest. On this plan, we see the altar stone, and we see stone 67. And beyond it, we have the Great Trilithon, stones 55 and 56 of the Great Trilithon. What happens if you are on this axis, looking this way, when the midwinter sun is setting? Again, I'll remind you, there's stone 67, there's the altar stone. What do you see when the sun is setting on the day of midwinter solstice sunset? If you're lucky and there are no clouds, you see the sun. As a result of this, you'll see in very many books people saying that another objective behind the planning of Stonehenge was in order to observe the midwinter sun setting. In this case, I have a colleague standing near the setting sun. What I do next is this. I make a reconstruction so that the two great stones of the Great Trilithon are present. So the sun setting, remember, when it sets, it comes down at an angle like this. So it only appears right at the last moment, in the last 3 or 4 minutes. Until then, you don't even see the sun because it's behind all these other stones. But in those last 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, the sun can be seen today because stone 67 has fallen. But if you put the stone back, which is what I've done here, it blocks the setting sun. Nobody on the axis walking towards Stonehenge in midwinter week can see the setting sun at all. It's impossible. Now let's move on about the voyage of Pytheas. So after a couple of days at Stonehenge, Pytheas resumes his journey onwards towards Cornwall. He's following trackways. In fact, he's almost certainly being led by a guide, a local guide. And on he goes and arrives eventually at Marazion, where we have St. Michael's Mount. And he sees the trading going on. He speaks with the commercial people who are at work there. He visits mines and describes the tin mines very neatly indeed. And he learns that St. Michael's Mount was the place where the ships came in, where they docked and received the tin being exported. Afterwards, he moves on to reach the Isle of Man, the Isle of Lewis, and it seems that he then spent the winter in Shetland, because working out the actual time taken for this journey, he's gone really from a start in March, and we must be by now in October or perhaps even November. He must stay somewhere for the winter, and Shetland is the most likely place. So he's there over the winter. He's able to talk with sailors, and he must have found a sailor who would agree to taking him to the region where there's pack ice. You know, for the Greeks, they were wholly Mediterranean people. They knew nothing exact about the northern regions of the planet. It was supposed that the northern part of planet Earth was cold and snow-covered or ice-covered, but he wanted to prove it by going there and seeing. So he arrives at some place which we presume is best answered by saying it was Iceland he got to. And he gave the name Thule. That's why the word Thule is up there at the top. And that's the sort of thing he saw. He couldn't progress any more. Ships of the type that he was sailing in couldn't get through ice like that. He did not land. He came back to Shetland, and then he went on to Denmark to find the source of the amber, which was the other commercial worry that he had in his mind. Well, all of this is explained in this book, which is now been released. I go into great detail on everything that I've already said, and anyone who wants to correspond with me, there you are. For a very long time, a puzzle at Stonehenge has been the oddity that one stone in the outer sarsen circle is only half size. Here we are. It's leaning now, but it's only half size, half the height, half the thickness, half the width. It has been airily mentioned that perhaps it might be there because of a count of a half day in some sort of calendar. Well, I've now clarified this exactly, and it goes this way. We start off by considering a solar calendar. So if we're starting here at stone 1 and going all the way around, we come back to where we started at, and stone 30 is adjacent. So to go round in 30 days would give you a solar month if you so chose to define a solar month that way. But it's better to look at it differently, because over here we have stone 11, which is only half size. So what I'm saying is this. If it was somebody's job to mark the stone of the day with something like, say, a white quartz stone, some marker, then on day 1, the marker stone would be put there, day 2 put here, day 3 there. And every morning after sunrise, the marker would be moved to the new position. But if we do it in such a way that when we reach stone 11, we only call it half a day, then by the time we get back to where we started, we have marked out 29.5 days, which is exactly the length of a lunar cycle. 29.5 days from here takes us to here. But to do it twice means we have taken 59 days to go around twice. If we do it 12 times, 12 lunar cycles, when we get here this time, the day count is 354, which you will notice is 11 days short of 365. So we have already done 12 lunar months. To do an extra 11 days to bring us here, we have now completed a solar year. 365 days is the addition of 354 plus 11. Now this stone here, stone 11, actually has another job to do. Besides counting out the days of the lunar cycle and the solar cycle, it is also throwing a shadow on the day of the winter solstice from here onto a stone which was waiting for it, stone 40. And this is a photograph of it happening. I actually took a photograph of stone 11, which is this one. The shadow is going across like that and is hitting these fallen stones, which are now in the way. But if those stones weren't there, instead it would be landing on stone 40. So I've emphasized the shadow, which I've shown in a photograph, and I am now emphasizing that if stone 40 was erected again, that's where it would be, and it would be receiving at its base the shadow of stone 11 for the winter solstice. So I'm concluding by saying that the winter solstice was recognized in a secondary fashion compared with the summer solstice. But in both cases, shadows were cast by a phallic-shaped stone onto a stone that was waiting for the arrival of the shadow. We conclude then that we have a lot of evidence that Stonehenge was built as a temple to the sun god. Pytheas naturally used the name Apollo. The British priests would have had their own name for it. So that is another problem which listeners may care to try and solve. What would the name of the sun god of Stonehenge have been? Well, I do make a suggestion of that in the book I just told you about. So, concluding again, everything that I've said today has been explained at length in the book that I've just had published about Pytheas and how he arrived in Britain and reached Stonehenge. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Terence. So Terence is actually here. He's going to be, he's at the back, and he's going to be in the small hall at the front with the stalls. He's got these amazing new book. You can get signed. If you've got any questions for him, he'll take questions. So before you run off for lunch, if you want to meet Terence and grab the book, please do, because it's a remarkable piece of research. I'm delighted he was part of Megalithomania 2024.